Deuteronomy chapters 29 to 31 today. This one opens with Moses talking about the Israelites having seen the wonders of the plagues of Egypt. And this is the second time this has happened, which seems to conflict with the census, where the second census established that the 600 or so thousand people at the second one were a different group of people to the 600,000 or so at the first census. So it's a bit odd, but I think we can probably ignore that on the basis that everyone does talk really weird back in this day and age. There's also mentioned that God gave the Israelites eyes to see those wonders, but not the mind to understand it, which I thought was brilliant. It seems logically obvious, as I've said before, that we're not going to be on the same thinking level as God. So that's one of the problems I think a lot of the atheists have with some of their critiques. And it's it doesn't look very sensible on the way I would look at the world. It's like, well, no, because you're a human and you're not going to be able to contemplate that. As it's nice, actually, that it's acknowledged in the Bible. That being said, it is a little problematic, isn't it? In the sense that it's rather convenient if you're making stuff up. And you get some of those really weird martial arts where people do weird things with mind bullets and people fall over. And it's, I can't show you how it's done because it's too dangerous. Okay, so, yeah, really? Bit convenient, maybe? I have a friend who teaches martial arts, actually, and one of the moves they have, they punch you in the throat. And yeah, sure, they can't do that for real. That's going to be a problem. But you can work out that there's some reality going on there. It's a weird situation in that it would make sense that we can't understand it, yet to say we can't understand it sounds a little bit convenient. Don't know. I guess that's a natural paradox that's going to exist with all this stuff. So we'll have to just move on anyway. There's another reference to circumcising hearts. And I sort of skipped over the last one because it was weird and didn't know what to do with it, but it's coming up again. So I asked the Google what it thought, and there's quite a lot said about it. It's clearly something that people are asking a lot of questions about, but having read quite a lot on it, I'm still really none the wiser. All I can really figure out is that to circumcise a heart is to remove some sort of barrier between people and God. Why that applies to the more conventional sort of circumcision, how that's a barrier to anything, I don't know. So I guess we'll just see if the context of later usages of it help it to make more sense. There's an interesting reference to heaven in the sense that Moses is talking about he's going to die soon. But he's saying that who, after he dies, is going to proclaim the rules of God to the Israelites to remind them what they're supposed to be doing. And he's saying that someone's not going to ascend into heaven to get this and come back and let them all know. So he's saying someone's not going to heaven. So it's sort of a slightly inverse reference to heaven. But he's still talking about it being a place that someone could go to and come back from. It doesn't seem to suggest in that there's any sense that people go to heaven after they die. It sounds more like that's where God is, so that's where you'd have to go to see him and get some sort of godly type stuff. But it never is a sort of an evolution, I guess, in the concept of heaven, in that we've had heaven as in sky, and then it's heaven sounding more like where God lives, and then it's heaven almost that in theory you could go to see God. So it does seem like the idea of heaven is developing slowly but surely, I think. The other part of that, though, is that Moses is saying there is no need for anyone to go to heaven to get the rules to come back and proclaim them. To be high-tech, I'm just going to read this to remember it. And he says that the reason is because the word is very near you, it's in your mouth and in your heart so that you may obey it. That would seem to tie in with the Adam and Eve concept, that fruit from the knowledge of good and evil. So we know what's good, we know what's wrong. Therefore, it's within us, and we know that. But part of what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to love God and worship him and all the rest of it. It's a tricky one, that, because it's potentially very interesting in the sense that, because I've talked about previously, there's a problem with all this stuff happening in Egypt and Israel. It's quite a small area. So anyone born in Australia or in America or something, on different continents, they've got no hope of knowing any of this stuff's going on. So unless they have their own stories over there that just haven't been recorded and handed down, then how can they worship and love the God with all their heart and soul or whatever it is? So maybe it's a suggestion that actually obeying that intrinsic knowledge within us that of what is right and what is wrong, following that would be enough. But But it also seems pretty clear that you are supposed to worship God, or it always says to love your God with all your heart, your soul and your mind, whatever it is. And how can you do that if you've never heard of him? There doesn't seem to be any suggestion that there's that intrinsically in us we have to be told about God. So I don't know, it's really interesting that though, but it does seem sort of somewhat incomplete. I have a friend, the same friend actually, who punches people in the throat. I pushed him on this because he's very dutifully watching all these videos. And I said, what do you think? And all the rest of it. Clearly not an atheist, clearly not a Christian or anything else. And it seems his feeling is that it's too much to untangle. How can you possibly know? And therefore, just don't be a punk and live a good life, and that hopefully that'll be enough. And this idea here about the word of God, whatever it is written on your hearts and in your souls, so you will know it in order to obey it. That would seem to tie in with that beautifully. I mean, it doesn't have the relationship element with God, but then how can you have a relationship with a God who is not hiding, but is very clearly, the point is that he's not overtly being in your face, so you're like, oh yeah, there's God, I'm going to do as I'm told, because there does seem to be that element that God wants us to choose to do the right thing. That all gets very heavy though, doesn't it? Oh my goodness. It's fascinating idea, it's really interesting, but difficult stuff to wrestle with, and not quite enough information there to really establish. But it is very consistent in the sense that it is following again that idea about right and wrong being known within us intrinsically and all the rest of it. So yeah, I don't know, we'll have to just carry on and see how it pans out and see what else adds to it. But yeah, the more it adds to it, the more sort of solid it gets. And granted, there are some of these weird contradictions, I guess, in some ways, like saying to the Israelites, you saw the plagues of Egypt, but hang on, we saw earlier that they're different Israelites. I think a lot of that does seem to be down to language. Of course, you have to be careful not to write off the bits that just grate on one another and keep the bits that make sense. But I know my tendency would be to try and go for a bigger picture rather than specifics anyway. Finally, there's also talk in this of listening to God's voice. That's a tricky one. I don't think anyone believes that God actually speaks in the way that you hear my voice speaking to you here. I don't think anyone believes that they hear God talking like that. Certainly not saying weird stuff like this, but you know what I mean. It seems I'm deeply sceptical of this because it's this idea that things pop into someone's heads, but a Christian might well, and I've seen them do it, say, oh, God just spoke to me saying this, and it's like, did he? It's there seems something deeply uncomfortable for me in the idea of any positive thought that pops in your head saying that God just went and whoosh, did it. You know, don't get me wrong, being open-minded about this, maybe that is a thing. It doesn't feel like a thing though. I guess that's the fairest I can say that. And it doesn't seem like when Moses is talking about listening to God's voice, it doesn't sound like Moses is saying that it's going to be a clear spoken voice being very explicit about what you have to do. I mean, after all, there are punks who went and smashed aeroplanes into buildings, presumably because they thought God told them to do it. And it's pretty sure he didn't. So it does seem to be on an individual level to judge an idea popping into your head whether God did it or not. You meet someone, oh, God brought us together or whatever. It's like, did he? There doesn't seem much about how life works that suggests that God is very deliberately manipulating things. It does seem the free will theme has been a theme. And by definition, people then make choices which then amplify over bajillions of us and will turn into just completely fluke events. So, I don't know, I just find that really difficult. When someone says God told them to do something, it makes me not uncomfortable, but... Well, no, I suppose it does actually make me uncomfortable. You feel a bit sort of, okay, I don't know. So did my dad think that God told him to do that? I said my dad did think. He thought God called him to come and be a vicar. And but I think perhaps I'm just thinking about it the wrong way. Yeah, another bit I'm not sure what to do with. But yeah, some big ideas there anyway to take forward. And then one more video for the book of Deuteronomy, and then we're on to the summary.